Hello, and thank you for joining in. Apologies for not having a lesson last week. This is the lesson that I had intended to present, and technical difficulties would not permit, but hopefully we're past that now. I suspect that you're kind of like me. It's the new year and all, and you're making New Year's resolutions, and one of them is probably to spend more time studying the book of Zephaniah. So here we are talking about Zephaniah, who is described in chapter 1 and verse 1 as the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, son of Amariah, son of Hezekiah, and it's said that he is prophesying in the days of Josiah, son of Amon, king of Judah. Uh, that puts Zephaniah in the royal family, and I've in the same generation as Jehoiakim, who is the last official king of Judah. His uncle Zedekiah took the throne in his place afterward, but we're here toward the end anyway. And I find it interesting, just by way of commentary here at the end. Uh, Hezekiah is a great king by all accounts. He had some errors toward the end, but a great king. And you'd like to think he's setting the nation up for success, but we have, what is it, 5 generations? Uh, one, two, three, four or five generations here that are listed, and of all those generations, there are exactly two people in Hezekiah's family who are described as being righteous. Uh, Zephaniah is one of them, and Josiah, of course, is the other. Almost certainly the greatest king in the history, certainly of the southern kingdom, arguably in the nation of Israel in general. That doesn't speak well for Hezekiah and his line. I don't know how much Hezekiah is to be blamed for that, but nevertheless, things are falling apart here, and clearly Hezekiah and Josiah and Zephaniah are the exception rather than the rule. The house of David has fallen very, very far. The Josiah, of course, is a relatively young king. He dies in his late 30s, and this is a generation after Josiah. So it's reasonable to assume that Zephaniah is a young man, probably a very young man. You can even go back to Hezekiah's day. Hezekiah's son Manasseh is the one who takes the throne. Manasseh is not the man from whom Zephaniah is descended. So, and presumably his ancestor was younger than Manasseh. So, we're looking at a man who's probably in his early 20s, something like that. He could be older, of course, but probably young. And he writes like a young man. He writes like an angry young man, as the cliche goes. Verse number 2 reads, I will completely sweep away everything from the face of the earth. This is the Lord's declaration. I will sweep away people and animals. I will sweep away the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea and the ruins along with the wicked. I will cut off mankind from the face of the earth. This is the Lord's declaration. And of course, the Lord's declaration, or this is the word of the Lord, or however your version translates it, that is an indication that this is inspired. They're God's words ultimately, but as is the case with all of the writers of the books of the Old and New Testament, God allows the personality of the individual to come through. They write with their own kind of language. You know, what other kind of language would they write with? God is guiding this process. We don't have a intention of discussing the nature of inspiration here, but I think it's noteworthy that Zephaniah is angry, and he talks like the angry young man, as it were. And I want to talk about that a little bit, about how here toward the end, as things are just about to completely collapse. Hello, and thank you for joining today. If your New Year's resolution is to study more in the book of Zephaniah, I have good news for you. That's what we're going to be doing here today. And apologies for those who are expecting this lesson last week. Technical difficulties. I'm sure everybody's getting tired of me saying that. But nevertheless, we're hoping to get these things worked out. I want to take you to the book of Zephaniah here. It's a tiny little book toward the end of the minor prophets. And talk about this man who is described as being the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, son of Hezekiah, who lived in the days of Josiah, son of Amon, king of Judah. That makes Zephaniah one of exactly two righteous people in the line of Hezekiah. And we're talking about 5 generations here. Hezekiah, a great man in many ways, fell off a little bit toward the end, but nevertheless a great king of Judah, one that made a lot of progress as far as the cause of righteousness goes, but certainly fell short in certain areas. And one of them apparently is training his children, because his son Manasseh was kind of a disaster, and he turn things around a bit at the end, but again, it seems like it's maybe too late. Josiah and Zephaniah are the only people here 4 or 5 generations down the line that we know about who were faithful. We do have some record of the sons of Josiah especially, and one grandson, and none of them were anything to brag about. It is a sad story when things go so far awry. And even in these relatively good times, as Josiah is trying to lead the people from a position of righteousness, there is a great deal of frustration in the eyes of Zedekiah here, who's writing, of course, by inspiration. Zephaniah. Easy mistake to make. I make it a lot. But Zephaniah is a young man, almost certainly. He's a generation behind Josiah, who was himself a young king. And Josiah's ancestor, Manasseh, was almost certainly older than the son of Hezekiah from whom Zephaniah is descended. So we're talking about young, perhaps even remarkably young, mid early 20s most likely, maybe even younger than that. And he writes like a young man. And I realize that God provides the words, but he provides the words in the personality of the writers. At least sometimes it seems like he does it that way. And Zephaniah sounds like a lot of 21-year-olds I've known in my life, and one that I used to be as far as that goes. Verse 2 says, I will completely sweep away everything from the face of the earth. This is the Lord's declaration. I will sweep away people and animals. I will sweep away the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea and the ruins along with the wicked. I will cut off mankind from the face of the earth. This is the Lord's declaration. This is primarily, I wouldn't say necessarily, but is primarily a prophetic language here, apocalyptic language, you might say here, exaggerated for a point. God is not preparing to destroy the entire planet here and all of mankind. That's not the point at all. If you wanted to look at this as, pardon me, a precursor to final event things, I'm not going to fight you on that. But the main point here is his destruction, the pending destruction of Jerusalem and Judah. And even that's not a final destruction. Even that is not completely obliterating the nation, and certainly not animals and whatnot. This is exaggerated language to make a point, and it makes the point, I think, very well. The idea that God is frustrated and beyond frustrated with the way that things are going among the people of God. Things are terrible, even in the days of a righteous king like Josiah, and they're getting worse. Josiah is trying to put a speed bump in front of all the wickedness, and he's certainly doing a lot of reform from the top down, as it were. But he's not going to be able to change a nation's character in 30 years or so, as he's on the throne. 29 years, I think it was, that he was on the throne. He may make some surface changes, and did, and that's all to the good. We're certainly glad that he did that. But he couldn't even convince his own children to serve the Lord faithfully, and certainly he couldn't convince the nation at large. And I bring this up at the beginning of a new year when you may be kind of like me, that you are somewhat cynical, somewhat jaded about the possibilities of life here on planet Earth. Things seem to get just worse every day almost. I don't know if it's actually getting worse or we just have a better view of it. The people who have access to the biggest microphones in the world are the biggest warmongers and hate mongers that we have. I don't know exactly how this measures up with, for instance, the 60s or the 70s or the 80s or whatever other decade you want to talk about, or previous centuries as far as it goes, previous cultures. It doesn't matter really when it comes down to it. The point is that things are bad, and it's pretty obvious that things are very, very bad. And one thing that we like to do, especially in America, certainly I like to do, is I like to kind of hole up in my little corner of the world, and I like to isolate myself and play my board games and spend time with my family and block out the world as much as I possibly can. And that's not an entirely bad thing to do, I don't think. But it can lead to a very skewed vision of the way the world works and the way God interacts with the world. We can, especially in America, if you're upper middle class or upper class or whatever, you may convince yourself that the things of God really don't pertain to this life. You're doing pretty good, and sure, there's a lot of sin out there, but life goes on, and your life is pretty good as far as that goes. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. Well, the text is quite clear with regard to that sort of mentality. In verse number 10 On that day, this is the Lord's declaration, there will be an outcry from the fish gate, a wailing from the second district, and a loud crashing from the hills. Wail, you residents of the hollow, for all the merchants will be silenced. All those loaded with silver will be cut off. And at that time I will search Jerusalem with lamps and punish those who settle down comfortably, who say to themselves, the Lord will do nothing good or bad. Their wealth will become plunder, and their houses a ruin. They will build houses but never live in them, plant vineyards but never drink their wine. The point here being that it's easy to assume that since things are going fairly well, as you may define fairly well, that must mean that the things of God don't really intersect very much with the things of this life. God's just doing his thing. It's almost a deistic kind of philosophy here. God sets us in place and winds us up, and we'll just see what we see, and that God's not involved really in this process much, if any. And if you read the Bible and if you believe the Bible, you know that that's not true. You know that God is intimately involved in the affairs of the things here in this life, probably more than we even realize. Or at least that's my speculation. Certainly, he has his fingers in the works at every level, and that includes, particularly in the context here in Zephaniah, that includes judgment. That includes bringing wicked people into account, to account for the things that they have done. And wicked people, by the way, is a category that we can define in a variety of ways, one of which is everybody. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, the text says in Romans chapter 3, verse 23. And we know, if we were honest with ourselves, that even on our best days, we are falling short of God's glory on the regular. And it's also the case in somewhat more depressing of a fashion that those who claim to be faithful, those ones who claim to be serving God effectively, spiritual Jerusalem, as it were, fall woefully short not only of the minutia of the law, but really even of basic principles of submission and obedience and holiness. That's what the text says here with regard to the people of Zephaniah's day. In chapter 1 and verse number 18, their silver and their gold will be unable to rescue them on the day of the Lord's wrath. The whole earth will be consumed by the fire of his jealousy, for he will make a complete, yes, a horrifying end of all the inhabitants of the earth. And this is not just Jerusalem. This is not just the bad people. This is everybody. All of us fall under God's wrath. And if we consider ourselves to be immune to that, if we are Christians or whatever term you want to use, I think we're going to be woefully disappointed. We need to come to grips with the idea of being under the wrath of God, and before we give up on that entirely, take whatever kind of peace, whatever kind of comfort God will offer to us in that place, and God will offer us peace. God will offer us comfort, and that's why we have more of the book of Zephaniah, not just chapter 1. There are opportunities to come back. In fact, there's genuinely good news at the end of this story. But it begins here in chapter 2 by writing here, gather yourselves together, gather together, undesirable nation, before the decree takes effect, and the day passes like chaff before the burning of the Lord's anger overtakes you, before the day of the Lord's anger overtakes you. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the earth, who carry out what he commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be concealed on the day of the Lord's anger. And this is a recurring theme when these doom and gloom predictions occur. It happens in Matthew chapter 24 when Jesus is prophesying about the destruction of Jerusalem. There are people who will escape. If you heed his words, if you see the warnings, if you see the signs, and you head for the hills, literally, in that particular example there, you can escape the worst that God has to offer. Now, that's not going to apply, of course, to final judgment when all these things are completely brought to pass. But when we see Jerusalem warned, when we see the nation of Judah warned, whatever kind of warning may come, generally speaking, if not every situation, there is this message that goes out ahead of time that gives people hope, that gives people the idea that maybe it won't be a complete and total disaster, at least not for all of us. Maybe some of us can find a measure of comfort, a measure of safety when we trust in God and go in his way, especially if we are one of the rebellious ones And we are given time and opportunity to repent. That's what 2 Peter chapter 3 is talking about, of course. The idea that God's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. God continues to forbear in his judgment of mankind because there are lost souls who may not stay lost. Maybe there will be somebody who wants to be saved. And what an incredible blessing that can be if we will do what Zephaniah tells us to do here. Seek righteousness, seek humility, embrace the idea that we are under God's wrath and that he has offered us a path out of this, that he will save us by his grace. We have to put ourselves in the path of that grace, though we have a personal responsibility to take hold of our salvation, work out our salvation with fear and trembling. Philippians chapter 2, verse 12 tells us. And it begins with trusting in God, right? In chapter 3, there is a rather horrible condemnation given to the nation of Judah, and particularly the city of Jerusalem. And this should be a warning to us, because if we're Christians and we consider ourselves to be the new Jerusalem here on earth, preparing for heavenly things while we wait here, that does not mean just because we put Jesus on in baptism at some point that the path is paved for us, that we can't possibly fall astray here. Jerusalem fell astray. God's people have always fallen astray. Nothing has changed with regard to that. And for the same reasons that this rebellious and defiled and oppressive city, verse number 1 in chapter 3, how that city fell. The text says in verse number 2, she has not obeyed, she has not accepted discipline, she has not trusted in the Lord, she has not drawn near to her God. Well, nothing has changed. We're the same kind of people as they were back then. The same kind of condemnation falls on us as well. The idea that we see God as the enemy, that we see him as something to be opposed, that something that maybe a little fondant to put on our the cake of our life, as it were, but not really anything substantive. Zephaniah tells us we need to dig deeper than that. We need to obey him. We need to accept whatever kind of training, whatever discipline comes from him, and trust that this is all for our good. Trust that this will work. Doing things God's way is going to work, and hopefully at least get to the point where we actually take pleasure in this. We take comfort in this. We draw near to our God. We don't see him as the enemy. We see him as the solution, as the friend. We call on his name, verse number 9 says there, for I will then restore pure speech to the people, so that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him with a single purpose. You're probably aware that the idea of calling on the name of the Lord is an Old Testament and New Testament term used frequently to talk about how a lost soul, a dying soul, can't possibly save himself or herself. Psalm 18, verse 3, and any number of other passages. In Acts 22, verse 16, of course, Paul calls on the name of the Lord by being baptized, or at least baptism is part of calling on the name of the Lord. The idea is acknowledging that we cannot save ourselves, that we must have his help to be saved. This is what Joel talked about in his prophecy. Paul refers to that prophecy in Romans chapter 10. Peter refers to it in Acts chapter 2. The idea that we can't save ourselves, but God can and will save us if we call out to him. And among other things, submit to baptism in the name of Jesus. This calling on the name of God, trusting in him to save us, this is our way out of this. This doom and gloom that we see in Zephaniah and so many other places, that doesn't have to touch us. That doesn't have to fall at our doorstep. We can accept salvation as he offers it and embrace it. Embrace whatever terms may come with it. Why would we pick nits at what God is asking us to do? Why not simply accept him, trust in him, and submit to him in every way? It's not that God is out to get us. It's not that God is our enemy here. God is trying to bless us. He's trying to bring us to himself. In chapter 3, he mentions this kind of terminology. Verse 14, sing for joy, daughter Zion. Shout loudly, Israel. Be glad and celebrate with all your heart, daughter Jerusalem. The Lord has removed your punishment. He has turned back your enemy. The King of Israel, the Lord, is among you. You need no longer fear harm. On that day it will be said to Jerusalem, do not fear, Zion. Do not let your hands grow weak. The Lord your God is among you, a warrior who saves. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will be quiet in his love. He will delight you with singing. This is seen as an accomplished reality. It's written in the present tense. We are already celebrating. We're already singing for joy because we have confidence that these hardships, difficulties, most of which were of our own making, God will forgive us of these things and welcome us into fellowship because he wants to do that, because he is thrilled to do that. He is the Father waiting for the prodigal to come home. When we decide to come home, He will embrace us. He will kill the fatted calf for us, not because we deserve it, but because we asked Him to do it, because we asked Him to accept us back as His child, not like the prodigal did, who didn't even feel worthy. Well, he's not worthy, and neither are you, neither am I. But God will do this anyway. He will take us in and love us and support us and encourage us in ways that we cannot possibly imagine in this life, and certainly in the life to come. That is the encouragement that we have, the faith that we have, that Zephaniah helps build in us. And there are many other passages that we could turn to that say the same thing, but our time is up for today. I hope that you can take some warning, certainly, from the book of Zephaniah and similar passages. But more than that, take some hope, take some confidence that no matter what's going on out there in the world, it need not drag you down. It need not destroy your faith and your hope and your confidence. Seek the Lord, draw near to Him while time remains, and rejoice that your salvation is already written in heaven. Thank you so much for following along, and God bless.